My background is I've worked in museums for over 20 years, and I've worked with some of you here today on funding applications. So it's one of the things I've done sort of throughout my career is work with funders to prepare funding applications, and also work with organisations such as yourselves to put in applications for a variety of different people, like ACE and Heritage Lottery and things like that, so, or Heritage Fund, should I say. As Helen said, there'll be time for questions as we go through as well. So I will start sharing the slides, and then we'll go from there. So I just thought it would be useful just to go over an overview and aims of today's workshop. So what we'll be doing is having a look at some of the key features of a good funding proposal, providing evidence to support your application, which is a key part of what you'll need to do, is get that evidence gathered together before you start an application. It's the go over the importance of understanding the difference between aims and objectives and outcomes and outputs. And I think some of this language can sometimes trip people up a little bit. So I thought it'd be worth spending a little bit of time just looking at that and just unpicking those a little bit as well. And then finally, just having a look at writing style and presentation. So just going over some sort of tips about how to actually write the funding application itself, in terms of some sort of tips around sort of style and presenting the information. And as I said, there's some time at the end for questions. During the presentation, we'll be doing some breakout sessions as well, just to give you a chance to talk to each other and then feedback to me. And then, as Helen said, if you've got any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, and then I'll try and pick those up, either as I'm going through if they're relevant to various sections, or we can pick them up at the end. So, so just move on to the slide. So as Helen mentioned, I did the workshop 1, looking at before you put in an application, really sort of thinking about before you apply for a grant, does it fit with your strategic purposes and core activities? Because that's one of the key things that an application can often get fail, basically, because your constitution doesn't reflect what you're putting in your grant application. So it's always worth checking those bits of information about your running of your organisation before you actually start an application, because more or less all funders now ask to see your constitution. Some don't, but most do. And then if your constitution isn't fitting with their aims and objectives in their grant, then that could be a reason for them failing. So, I mean, it's an easy thing to happen with organisations. There's often organisational drift, and you do move away from your original purposes. And, you know, what you're doing is you know, legitimate and, you know, fits with what you're doing, but it's just making sure that your documentation does fit with what you're actually delivering as an organisation. So I went over that in quite a lot of detail in workshop 1. So it'd be useful just to, if you know, for you to refresh yourselves on that as well. And then another key thing as well that we went over in the first one is that the project and your need should be the reason that you're applying for funding, not that the funding is available and your project is fitting those requirements. So, and again, that's a key thing that people often do, is don't, you know, spend enough time thinking about whether they should apply or not, and whether that funder is the right funder. It's just a piece of funding has come up, and then they're responding to it. So it's just turning that on its head and making sure you spend time thinking about that before you put in an application, because it might not necessarily be the right thing for you to do. But as I say, we went through that in quite a lot of detail in workshop 1. So we're straight into thinking about making you have a bit of a think and making you talk to each other. So I thought it'd be useful, just before we got into it all, is just for you to break out into groups and have a bit of a chat about what you think makes a good funding application, and to discuss that, and then feedback to the group about your thoughts and your your feelings about that. So I'm just going to briefly stop sharing so I can just break you into the groups. So I think we've got, let me have a look, how many have we got now? 10 people, so I'll break you up into 3 groups, and what we'll do is I'll give you about 5 minutes to have a very quick chat about what you feel makes a good funding application. If you could think of 3 things, it doesn't have to be 3, up to 3 things, what you think makes funding application, and then just nominate somebody from your group to feedback, and then we'll have a discussion about that. So I'm just going to just admit someone else. So I'm just going to wait for them to come in. So I'll create the group now. And then if you've got any questions, just put anything in the chat and I can just answer it while you're doing that. So is everybody okay with that? Nod or put your hand up. Thank you very much. Is that everybody? I think it is. Right, so have you all nominated one person to feed back? Yeah, so can do you want to raise your hand if you want to speak first? Thank you, Angie.
Okay, so we were in breakout group 3.
Yeah.
Budget was a given.
Yeah.
But so we didn't include it in our top 3. So the first one was we've gone
that down as well. So
we've gone for being clear and concise, and the application being legible and have a good sort of readability. So communication is important.
Yeah.
We've then gone to include smart targets within the application, and with that in mind to sort of outline any mitigations if problems crop up within the project. So you're already sort of portraying that you've given thought and outlined sort of potential risk to the project. And then our third point was enthusiasm. If you don't have enthusiasm for the project and you don't communicate that enthusiasm, how can you expect anybody else to be enthusiastic about it?
Yeah, I think certainly all those things are things that I'll be picking up on through the course of today's workshop. One thing I haven't really picked up on, but is a good point, is that whole thing about risk assessment as well. Quite a lot of the time, funders will now ask for a risk assessment of your project. And I've recently been asked to do one that was against cost as well, which I've never been asked for before as well. So yeah, that is something that is often a key thing in funding applications as well, and something to think about when you're putting your application together as well, about those risk factors as well. As I say, some are more explicit about it than others. Some will give you a format to do it, while others it'll be part of a question or part of the guidance as well. So yeah, so group 2, could I ask you to feedback? Is that okay?
Yeah, we were talking about how it's important within the application, say about how you're going to reach out to different strands in the community. Can you bring in a schools program alongside, also working with different community groups? Being realistic about, I suppose this is kind of in the pre-planning before you make the application, but being realistic about who will actually carry out the work and how it will be done to ensure that you actually successfully get to the end of the project. You know, because you don't want to start with all the momentum and then it all sort of peters out. And also linking it in with, actually, like you were saying, about with the museum that you're working for and what they want to do, because you don't want it to be so far out of the box that it just looks like you've just thought of a random project that's nothing to do with your own aims and objectives are. So it's still being authentic to your own setting, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I said, that's one of the things that's really key for even before you put in an application, is make sure that you're clear about how that is linking into and reflecting your organisation. Certainly about that realism as well. I think that's a good thing to do, is that sort of reality check. Within the first workshop, we did a sort of cost benefit analysis, looking at where it was important, you know, where you're spending your money, and do you actually need to put in an application, or is it better to do maybe achieve that what you want in a different way? So I set out a grid sort of matrix in there. So again, that would be good for people to go look back at. And then yes, definitely sort of reaching out to those community groups and making sure that you're actually doing something that they want as well. So we'll be covering that and sort of evidencing needs. So which is that side. So so group 1, could I just ask someone to feedback from group 1, please? Oh, Andrew, I think you need to come off mute.
Sorry.
No, so I spotted your lips were moving, and I guess you weren't just mumbling to yourself. So
it's the modern world, isn't it? You're on mute.
It is, yeah, no, it's easy to do as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Wish you could do it to kids. So we spent a lot of our time talking about making sure that actually what you want to do is a really good fit to the criteria that the funder is putting up. It isn't worth applying for something where what you want to do isn't really central to the kind of thing they obviously want to fund. We, as well as the criteria for the project, also look carefully at the small print about eligibility. So, for example, an issue my museum runs into is we are in rented property with a sort of medium-term lease, and that excludes us from certain kinds of funding because it raises questions about sustainability.
Yep.
And then in terms of what you're proposing, we talked about the need for it to be a coherent and finite project with boundaries that's achievable with the resources that you're investing and you're asking the funder to invest.
Yeah.
And a feeling that they will be looking for something that when you've done that project, you have in some way improved your museum, your organization. It's got some new capability or feature or facility, and that new thing is sustainable without ongoing funding from the same organization. You've baked it into how you operate and your normal operating budget.
Yeah, you've picked up on one of those key words that you see a lot in funding applications and guidance, resilience and sustainability.
Yeah.
So that's a key thing. And again, that goes back to that whole thing about, as you say, checking about eligibility and making sure that you're fitting in to what the guidance is from your funders. And again, that's something we very much covered in that first workshop, is making sure you read what they want. And also, as you say, checking that eligibility as well, because yes, a lot of funders will have around the terms of your lease as well. So we had one recently that I worked with that it was they were expecting quite a long lease term to be left on your lease. So we actually had to, luckily the organisation at the time was actually renegotiating its lease, so we put a break clause in later than would have normally been put in. So there's things that come up that you could do those sort of checks before you put in an application. So a lot of what you were talking about is very much around that sort of eligibility criteria, wasn't it? And just making sure you're producing what the funder actually wants.
Yeah, and basically don't waste your energy on things which aren't going to succeed going to fall at the first hurdle.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were saying right in that first slide, wasn't it? It's make sure there's a need for your project, and that you as an organisation have talked about that, and then you've got buy-in from everybody at the organisation as well, because I think that's another thing that often people don't necessarily have. And that's really important. Everybody's signed up to what you're doing and is clear about what you're doing as well. So I think that those things. So yeah, so I think from what everybody's fed back, I think they've either been covered before in workshop 1, so that there's some information that we won't be covering today because that was in that particular presentation. But I've tried to pick up on that, just been feeding back. And then moving forward, I'll be picking up on some of those other things as we're doing today, and then 1 or 2 things will get picked up in workshop 3 as well, because some of that risk assessment stuff does link into getting your figures right as well. So you've got that is the workshop 3 as well. So okay, well, thanks so much for doing that, everybody. I think that's really useful, and hopefully it got you gave you a chance to speak to each other a little bit as well. So I'm just going to start sharing screen again. Just going to share my screen again and just move on to the next slide. So again, I mean, these are the things that I'd sort of picked up on, and I think these are quite sort of broad ranging and do cover, I think, what you've fed back to us. So that idea about having a clearly defined problem or need, and then backed up by solid evidence from your organisation. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that evidence might look like and get you to have a think about what that might be as well. Again, breaking that into groups, but that is a key. It's some of this information is things even before you put pen to paper, is making sure that you're doing the research that's needed for that application as well. And it's not only, like you're saying, reading the guidance and making sure you're clear about your eligibility and you've got all your ducks in order then, but it's also getting together that evidence base before you start as well, because that will influence how you write your application. And it does very much, we'll go on to this as well, very much fit into your outcomes and outputs of your project as well. One thing that we've touched on a lot is this whole idea of having a clearly defined project proposal, and as some people picked up on, is being a realistic and practical solution to the problem or way to meet the need. And then again, we come back to this whole thing about having achievable outcomes, which I know one of the groups picked up on as well. So yeah, it's that thing about being realistic and achievable. Then there's evidence of your organisation's effectiveness, includes things like your track record, well, includes your track record and your credibility. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and about what types of evidence that you might include to do that, whether you're an organisation that's been applying for funds for a while, or you're a new organisation. And then there's the added value aspect of a funding application as well, is that additionality that you're bringing that a funder isn't necessarily asking for, but then you can include in your application as well to show your you're a good investment for that funder, and that's something that someone that they want to invest in and work with and spend their money. So as I mentioned, I was just going to go into looking at providing evidence to support your application in a little bit more detail, just about looking at why you might want to do this. So as we keep saying, it's like looking at that, having that clearly defined problem or need. One of the important things is as well that is that whole thing about don't assume that the funder has any prior knowledge or any information about you as an organisation. So making sure that you're explaining your problem clearly and you're defining what that is as well. So it's again just making sure that from your point of view you're giving the funder as much information as possible. So then evidence really fits into that area as well. So it's about providing that evidence and that you're proving to the funder that you understand the need, and this in turn gives the funder confidence in you that you're not wasting, as I said before, they're not wasting money on you. And so this is all connected with that word that you see in applications quite often these days is need. So what is the need for your project? So you're really looking at why you're proving to a funder what the need is, and that you can prove that there is a need for your project. So, and then that need does inform your outcomes as well. And as I said, we will talk about outcomes in a little bit more detail later as well. So. For some reason. There we go. It was going the wrong way for some reason. I was pressing the forward button and it was going backwards. Right, so I'm going to make you talk to each other again. You'll be pleased to hear. So what I'd like you to do is have a think about what that evidence is that you might support, you might gather together to support a funding application. So I know some of you might have not have applied for funding before, but you can still have a think about what sources you might have that can be used to support an application. So it doesn't need to, it can be internal information, but it can also be external sources of information as well. So again, I'm just gonna, when I break it into 2 groups, I'm going to do it into 3 groups again. And again, if you could have a think about 3 sources of evidence that you might think about using for an application. I mean, you may have applications that you've got in mind that you can directly pull in, or it may be a hypothetical funding application. So I'm just going to stop sharing so I can just put you into groups again. So is everybody okay with that? Just nod or put your thumb up, whichever one. Okay, brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to put you into breakout rooms again. I'm going to try and put you into different ones, but we can all talk to some people again. So. Okay, I'll put you into breakout rooms again. Again, if you do the same thing, I'll give you a bit of a warning before we're just going to come back and feedback again. Just nominate someone to feedback to us again. So, okay, I'll see you in a few minutes. Right. Sorry about that. I did try and randomise you, but I completely had a technological failure on that one. So it couldn't work out. So sorry, you were in the same group. So I will ask a different group to feedback first. So group 2, would you mind feeding back first about your sort of thoughts about evidence?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a tough one because 2 of us in the group have not written any bids or anything before, so we were kind of a bit of brainstorming. So no,
that's always a good thing, actually, sort of thinking. I guess it makes you think a bit more as well, actually, and you know, because there's quite a lot out there that you could use. So
yeah, so whether it's right or wrong or not, but sort of if you want to work with a community group, evidence that that group actually wants to work with you and fits with that they're going to get something out of it. So evidencing the need for it with that group and how they work together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that could be through something like a letter of support or something like that as well, because a lot of funders now ask for that. So.
Oh, sorry, I have a really bad internet connection, so I keep phasing in and out.
That's right.
So I missed
you can turn your camera off if that's helpful. So.
Oh right, okay. I'll see if that helps.
Yeah, so that might help.
So work.
Right.
Okay, I'll see if that works.
Yeah, that might help, Daniel. Yeah.
Thank you. And the other one, sort of, if you've done like a test project to see if it's actually your idea will work, or you know how it'll work. So evidence from that, and then also how it's going to fit. Show that it's going to fit with your collection and your growing collection and your strategic aims and that. So we did. I wasn't part of it, but one of my colleagues put a bid in for an auction. There was a diary at auction, and we had to obviously say how it fit with our collection and why it was important for us to bid for it and that. So I suppose evidencing its fit with your strategic aims and your collection.
Yep. Yeah.
Sorry, that was really rambly.
No, that's fine. And also, I mean, it just, you know, even if you haven't put in something before, there's, as you say, there's things you can think about that you will have within your organisation, and also externally as well. So I'll see what the other groups come back with as well, and also I've got a slide just going through some of the sources that you might want to look at as well. But I mean, certainly with that first one, in terms of community, you know, letters of support are quite a common thing for funders to ask for as well. So you can evidence some of that through them and making sure that, you know, they've read the guidance as well and they're responding as well, and they're providing a letter of support that meets your need as well. So you can do that, which is an option. So group 1, are you okay to feedback?
Eventually I'll find that mute button. But so we ended up with quite a shopping list. So and one of the things Claire mentioned was that they applied during the peak of COVID to improve ventilation, and for that, you know, photographs of the lack of ventilation and where ventilation was going to be installed was important. that led us to talk about wanting to make sure when you submit that you do have plans and costings that you're comfortable to stand behind for the project you're trying to do, particularly if it involves some kind of building works or refurbishment, and that you've got good estimates and things. You're not just guessing at numbers. Something which Emma suggested is helpful. It's part of informing the funders about your museum. Is append your brochure or leaflet or something like that, if you can upload it, if it's electronic, or at least a link to your website so they can browse around and learn more about you, especially if the application form has tiny boxes in which you can't say anything. Other things we talked about when you're having evidence about visitor numbers, if you're providing a research service, how many requests you've had, who they've come from, what the results have been. So kind of know what you're supporting. If you're bringing on new people and so forth, how is that going to benefit the public, your volunteers? How are you going to train those people? So evidence that you've got a structured program, you know what's going to change, you know what the cost implications of that are going to be for you, and you can hopefully quantify what the benefits are going to be for your audiences. Maybe you can take more of them, maybe you can offer them more activities and so forth, and basically put numbers under everything.
Yes, that's
and
right.
Invariably you need good financial records, both historical, current and projections for the future.
Yes. So you've covered quite a lot there. Some of that is things that we'll be looking at next time as well. So the thing about submitting plans and costings, be very much looking at that under workshop 3 in terms of focusing on figures and making, as you rightly said, making sure you have cost estimates, and funders often ask for over certain amounts of money. They're asked for 3 tens and things like that. So that's very much something we'll be talking about next time. The quantitative figures, you're absolutely right. That's really important to have that information. And actually, a lot of people don't even have basic visitor figure numbers. So it's really important to make sure that you have those in place as well. And then your historical stuff, that's very much about your track record and sort of proving your track record, which we'll also talk about as well. So let's just say you've covered quite a lot within your group in terms of like looking at what we're being, looking at moving forward as well. Some of those things, it's interesting actually, because I'll just see what group 3 feeds back with as well. So then I'll see whether I need to say the next bit or not. So group 3, are you okay to feedback as well?
Okay, well, we came up with 3 points. We found this one a bit more difficult than the last one. Yeah. But our first one was, for example, collections audit. So you've got a benchmark so you can see where there's problems are. And then that sort of audit is your evidence. You also sort of, which Andrew has already mentioned, visitor surveys.
Yep.
And we all sort of thought of visitor surveys in sort of evidence where there's gaps for audience development and sort of targeting new audiences. And then finally, our collecting policies as the evidence. And this is then to demonstrate if you have a particular object like pub signs that needs conserving, you can demonstrate their value to your collection and why they need to be conserved. So it's the collecting policy was also the evidence.
Okay, right, okay, this is really interesting actually, because one of the key things in terms of funders which applications often fall down on is evidencing need. And actually I'm going to be blunt actually here, because it's the easiest thing to do. It's a lot of what you've talked about, as I say, are things that you would include in an application, but not necessarily under this section. So it's some of the things that are things like visitor figures and some of that. And depending on your application, you might look at things like a collections audit and things like that. So that piece of information very much depends on your application. So what I'm going to do is show you the next slide, and then perhaps maybe I hadn't planned this, but I think maybe I'll get you to feedback again, because I think this is, because it's such a fundamental part of an application and what you do, that it's just really important to understand what they mean by evidence and need. So I'm just going to go back to sharing the screen again, and just move on to the next slide. Right, so in terms of potential sources of information, potential sources of evidence, this is the type of thing that a funder would expect you to include within an application. And as I said, some of you came back with some of this information, but then it does go more broadly than what you were actually talking about as well. So as some people rightly said, it's your own evaluation and monitoring. So this can be anything from feedback from workshop and activities you've had on, visitor survey responses, comments books, you may have case studies, you could have comments on things like TripAdvisor and things like that, so which I've talked about later, actually, TripAdvisor and Google reviews and things like that, so which often people do use for their own monitoring and evaluation as well. Then looking outside your organisation, you can look at local statistics that are actually gathered by your local authority. Local health authorities have lots of information as well. There's lots of information from tourism data as well. If people are interested afterwards, I can point you into some more specific sources of this information, but this is just an overview. There's actually stuff within the heritage sector and museum sector as well, things like museum audience report, the taking part survey as well, so you can pull information out of those as well. As I mentioned, letters of support, local area profiles. As when we come back, I'll just ask people whether they know what those are, but they provide, you buy them basically from the audience agency, and they provide you a profile of your local area, looking at your demographics and then how people fit into certain profiles of how they may visit your museum or not. I touched on TripAdvisor and Google reviews. Census is a really important source of data. I mean, funders do recognise that it's coming to the end of the current census cycle, and that information will be out of date, but a lot of local authorities will do estimates and update that and provide a summary of the local area about where they feel that the local population is increasing and in what areas. You can look at national reports and policies, and this may be, for example, if you're putting in a project to do with health and well-being, there's information out there from like the King's Fund and things like that around sort of more general sort of health and well-being information that you may want to refer to as a sort of national reference point. And then again, it sort of feeds into those national reports and policies with academic findings as well. So it can be that it might be that there's a specific piece of research that's been carried out that isn't from a museum or from the heritage sector, but is still backs up what you want to be looking at. So I'm just going to take everybody off. I'm going to stop sharing at the moment, and just what I'd just like to do is just have a chat about that a little bit more. So because I think, because as I say, it's really important that you get this right, because that is the type of information that they will be looking for. So could I just ask, did they not understand what I was asking in the first place, or did they not think that that type of information was the type of information that should be included? So can I just take you off? Can you just come off mute, put your hand up basically, and just then talk to me about that. So has anybody sort of got any comments? Angie, sorry, you were first.
Well, just to say, I think I just misunderstood for me what was included in the evidence. So I think it was Claire sort of said letters of support, but I thought it was more a sort of piece of paper with something, with an evaluation, or well, in my mind, the collecting policy already. So I think
so it's much more broad than that, and it's looking at, say your project is working with a a group who've got dementia, for example. So for that, you could look at some, you might have some evidence internally that you've already worked with the group, which I think someone else said that you may have a project you've already done. So you can use the evidence from that. But then also funders will look more broadly as well, but about looking at the local demographics. So what is the proportion of older people in your area? Is it like a higher proportion or a lower proportion? You know, how many care homes are locally? You know, that kind of evidence as well to show that you've looked more broadly around to see what that need is, and you know, is there a higher population of older people in your area, or are there a high number of care homes, as well as that more quantitative that you've spoken to the people. And so it's sort of that you're trying to give us as whole a picture as possible about your need, and that you've done that research, and you sort of, I suppose it's you've done your due diligence about it. What they want to see is that you've done that research, and that you know that there's that it's a need, that there's a need out there to do it. So yeah. I mean, sorry. So we go Andrew first and then Val. Yeah.
So, and this is an interesting list. For us, we kind of see ourselves as a national museum. And so obviously, it's important we serve our local area, but actually our visitors come from across the UK, because we are the only computer museum of that scale.
I was going to say, are you the National Computer Museum?
Yeah, that's right. Rather grandly titled ourselves that. But our audience is national. And so, we can give evidence on things like our visitor numbers. We can give evidence of things like government policy towards improving computing education. There's a lot of investment they've made there and so forth. And we can satisfy some of the needs identified in those education programs. The local things are sort of harder for us, I think, because we aren't a museum that has a huge local significance apart from the actual location we're in, which is one of the places where computing started. So I sort of find myself wondering, what are the national level resources I could draw on than the local ones?
Yeah, so that would be things like there's national reports from the tourism, so within the nations there's tourism reports. There's also things like the Taking Part survey, and museums survey as well. But what I would say as well is about that local versus national, which is something that comes up a lot for me because I do a lot of audience development work, is that even though you're a national museum, you've still got a local audience. So it may be that you would do things, maybe a project that you're doing would have more of a local impact than a national impact. So it depends on your project and what you're doing. So it could be that you would have to look at your local stats because of the type of project you're doing. So it may be that you've got a local group coming in and doing some work with you on brain has gone dead on that, but it may be that you've got something local. So you've got sort of two elements there. You can look towards the national figures, and there's plenty of stats out there. And I'm quite happy if you want to contact me afterwards. I can talk about that in a little bit more detail, or I'll provide some more detail.
That's a good point. I know we do local activities. We do, for example, activity weekends for kids to take part in. That's invariably our local audience.
Yeah, and then you can look locally about what your percentage of families are locally and things like that. So that's the type of thing that if you're putting in a funding application for that, that's what the funder would.
Yeah. Probably our most fun local thing was a local women's club decided to come in and clean our display cases because they'd come round and decided they were a bit dusty, and that's rather fun. We didn't need funding for that, but it's don't overlook local, absolutely don't overlook local resources.
No. Val, sorry.
Yeah, I think I was just going to sort of talk about the word need, because sometimes it's an enhancement or an appetite for something. I mean, a need is, it sounds as though, that is something that if it weren't there, that there would be a lack of something. But sometimes it's just, for instance, online lectures that we're putting in a bid for at the moment. Now, that's not a need as such, but it's an enhancement of a local history and that sort of thing. And I think I was just querying the sort of need, that whether we get hung up on.
So for that, there's because of COVID, there's a lot of information out there about how people are interacting online.
Yeah.
And again, I can point you to various different bits of work that's been undertaken about how people have shifted and their sort of their engagement has shifted as well in terms of online. So you could very much use that to support your you know, you're doing this online because yes, we've had feedback internally, but also in a wider context, people have been having that shift across and that are engaged online more as well. So yeah, so and I should say as well, need can be tangible and intangible as well. So there is that kind of thing. But in terms of what the funder is looking for, it's always they're looking for some kind of evidence that you're supporting what you're saying you want to do. So does that make sense? Yeah. Claire? Yeah. Oh, you're
yeah. I've just turned off you. Because I was thinking the grant I think I've only ever applied to one grant lately, because we've had lots of other things. We haven't been in the office really, but when I did the pub signs as the conservation of them, we wanted to get them, they needed it because they were disintegrating, but it's looking at how so I was looking at, so the actual need for those was historical evidence showing how important they were to the village we're in. They are symbols of community hubs, they are symbols people remember, especially when one of the pubs is actually gone now.
Yeah.
So we've backed it up with visitor figures that people are interested, and it's trying to work. I think it's also trying to link what type of grant you're going for.
Yeah.
And actually, because we went for conservation grant.
Yeah.
So the evidence we were thinking about the pub signs was showing her their historical importance, that one of them's gone, they're symbols of the village, and backing up with people remember them and linking it with the reminiscences that we have done in the past, and linking it, showing that when I've done things on Facebook about the pubs, we got so much response. Oh, I remember drinking there and I've been there before. So it's
absolutely.
So you
yeah,
could use I kind of used Facebook that.
Yeah, and it's always again, that's comments coming back to you,
yeah,
and evidence it. So again, a lot of the time with, even if it is a conservation project, a lot of the time funders now will ask for an engagement aspect with it as well. Some funders do have a pure kind of like thing, but often it's Helen. Yeah.
Just to say, I think you know this already, Sonia, but literally yesterday we had an internal team meeting with the audience agency because SCMD has commissioned some engagement, they call them engagement area profiles, I think, reports. So like geographically for boundaries, but we've done it for the whole Southeast. So, and we'll be rolling out a training for each area, looking at those specific data sets for those areas, and you can come to different areas as well. You don't just have to come to East Sussex one, you could come to East Sussex and Kent, say, if you were on the borders. So, and that's really looking at some of the, like, I know that was what in Sonia's list, but it's really like learning how to look at that data and how to use it, particularly around thinking about audience development work, but also like for funding. And like you say, it's not just about need, is it? It's about potential, or like you say, Val, enhancement. It's looking at it, it's just sort of checking back, you know, okay, well, are we actually making the most of actually who's around us? You know, like maybe we're just missing the potential there, you know, so. But just to let you know that those are coming up, so keep an eye on all the normal channels. Helen,
actually, because I meant to mention that and then I completely forgot all about it. So no, because I'm actually going to the one for Hampshire, because I've used local area reports for a lot of funding applications and to support audience development, and they are incredibly useful. So I would highly recommend going to the training and getting abreast of what they actually can mean for you as an organisation and how they can support you, not just for funding applications, but across your development work. So it could be right from forward planning and business planning through to engagement with audiences as well. So they've got a whole raft of uses, and they're well worth it. Well, in this case, you'll get some information from the work that the South East Museum Development Fund are doing. But if you want something more locally, and what I've also done is often included the price of one of these area reports in a funding application as well, because that really helps as well. I can't stress how useful they are. They're really, really helpful, and you can.
I mean, we've paid for them, so you're going to get them for free.
I was going to say,
and so, they last until 2023, 24, I think. So
they're really helpful. So so I would really, I'd really say that, you know, if you're putting in a funding application, go to that training, get access to it, because they're really useful for that, helping with that whole evidence side of things. And as I say, a lot of funding applications, that's the bit that they really fall down on, because they don't have that evidence in there, and you're not supporting what you say you want to do through the evidence. So sorry, I think I probably banged on about that enough, because it is one of those really important areas. I think it was good just to revisit that and just make sure you're all kind of you're all clear. So is everybody clear about that now? Does that help a bit more, just coming back and just revisiting that as well? And as I say, at the end, if there's any further questions, we can also, yeah, Andrew, yeah. Yes, Andrew's just put in the chat about that. Yes, yeah, I mean, I think COVID has just brought in a whole host of different audiences for people online. And that's one of the things, again, with evidence, you get overseas visitors and from different parts of the country that probably may not get to see you. So again, that whole evidence base about online engagement is, really valuable.
We were talking yesterday about this, actually, with the audience agency, about how lots of questions have come up from museums about how they can sort of join up these the digital audiences with their other audiences that may be coming in, and but also about how this has really made us realize that doing stuff digitally isn't about getting people to come. Like that, doing stuff digitally, engagement and talking to people is an end in itself, like is a thing in itself, is an outcome in itself. It doesn't have to be a conversion, if you like, to visiting on foot. So, that's really interesting. It's nice that we finally got to that place, I think.
Yeah, it's taken quite some time, I think, but I think that's kind of organisations are realising that online audiences are an audience in their own right and don't necessarily have to go any further. And in terms of evidence and things, I think we've talked quite a lot around what evidence you could provide for that, in terms of something as Val was saying, what she's doing. So, right, I'm just going to go back to sharing the screen. So I think probably, we've probably covered all this in just talking about it in a little bit more detail. So yeah, just reiterating about that, it's that evidence that you are collecting is specifically related to the project that you're doing. I mean, it sounds kind of quite obvious, but again, it's just making sure that whatever you're using is specific to that project and specific to what you want to do. People do ask about, I have had questions back about this, about how much evidence should you provide? So you really need to look at your funding, the size of what your funding application is. So for example, I mean, if you're going for a multi-million-pound heritage lottery application, they would expect much more evidence than if you were going for perhaps a SEMD grant that is smaller. So it's really about looking at how much you're applying for, and then being sensible about the sort of a proportionality of what you need to provide in terms of that. So I would very much be guided by the size of your funding application, which is slightly not an answer, I know, but it's just it's just, as I said, I think it's just being using your common sense about that. With some funders, they will ask, be quite specific about it, others won't. And again, I think we just touched on this as well, is just, make sure you've got a good mix of evidence, not just from within your organisation, but externally as well. And then you've got a mixture of qualitative, so things like quotes, letters of support, and then the quantitative stuff, so your facts and figures. So it's just showing that, you've got a nice sort of blend of evidence coming through and supporting your application. So. Okay, so this is one that often gets people get tripped up on, is about aims and objectives. So again, it's just I just thought it'd be useful just to touch on this, just to make sure that try not to teach you how to suck eggs and all that, but just to make sure that you're really clear about it, because again, it does make a difference in terms of your application as well. So this is just a sort of brief summary of what an aim and objective is. But what I'd like you to do is just individually, just I'll spend a few minutes, I'll give you 5 minutes just to think about a project that you're planning to support, or you may have already supported, maybe thinking about a specific aim and a related objective for that project. So I'll just leave this up for you so you can make reference to it. But yeah, if you just have 5 minutes, and then we'll just feedback on that as well. It's just sort of check understanding, really, just to make sure you're really clear about what an aim and objective is. So yeah, just like to spend. I'm just going to stop sharing that and just bring everybody back. So yeah, if has everybody had a chance to just have a quick go at that? Good. What I was going to say, would anybody mind volunteering to share their aim and objective with the rest of the group? I have a volunteer. Go on, Claire.
Our aim is we would like a new case, a new display case.
Yeah.
Because we're wanting to do more exhibitions based on the collections, and we haven't got quite the space to display the stuff, so like 3D objects. So that's what we'd like to do. I have seen a grant potentially. It's linked to community work. So one of our objectives is to find some local groups who would be willing to contribute towards our next exhibition. Thus we have somewhere to display their work. Oh, we need a case to put it in. So it's it's got a bit of a feedback loop on it all.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Aim,
so
case, objective.
So what
find
I'd say
somewhere
about
to
that
display.
aim is that's quite broad. That's very, very broad. So that may be sort of like looking at your that may be sort of the need for your project, but then the aim would be something a bit more specific. It would be a lot more specific than that. So you just need to. So an aim is about what you're trying to, the change you're trying to, the difference you're trying to make. So by having that display case, you may have it's to increase your display space within the museum. And then the objective is that you want to get more people to engage with certain parts of the collection because you'll be putting it to display. So it's just really narrowing that down and maybe being quite specific again about it and about what that is. So yeah. Does anybody else want to just share? Oh, here we go. Val, go on. Oh, Val, you need to come off mute.
Doesn't want to come
there
off.
We go. Yeah, you're there.
I'd like to commission a young artist at the start of her career to create a design for the museum that sort of portrays the museum or the town that we can then use to make up into tote bags, cushions, that sort of thing. And it's really, the aim is to have modern art represented because we have some old paintings. So we want to do that. We also want to promote the whole sustainability thing. So with the plastic free project we're doing, we want to be able to, I say, offer the tote bags and things. And the objectives are to have an exhibition where we offer the young artist a chance to display some of her work. And also we would have a group of volunteers, a sewing group that could make up some of the items that would be also for sale in our shop, as well as throughout the museum where that is necessary. Yeah.
Again, I think you're being quite broad about that, aren't you? Again, it's trying to sort of narrow that down and be a bit more specific about what your actual aim is. So again, just trying to sort of refine that down and just being much more much clearer about what you want to do, and then linking those objectives to that aim as well. So again, I think it's one of those things, again, it's just trying to make sure that you're being as specific as possible. So I was just going to share a couple of, just before I do that, does anybody else want to share their aims and objectives? Nicola.
Sorry, I just wanted to share, because I'm not sure if I'm getting it, but so this was a project that I'm currently working on, but I didn't apply for it. So, so the aim would be to engage with people of colour who spend their time in the countryside, who are not currently part of the narrative at the Mill. And the objective would be that I interviewed them and put their interviews into an online exhibition. So they were represented at the Mill and they were visible to other visitors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think your aim is getting there and being much more kind of like focused on a thing, but then your objective, I'd say that it's probably something like, you know, you would provide maybe a workshop to work with them or something like that. So it's a very specific kind of part of that. So I think, again, that objective is maybe a little bit too broad in terms of linking to them, because with an aim and objective, you can have one aim and many different objectives to meet that aim. So then splitting it down into various different aspects of that as well. So yeah, just not having too broad a aim or objective, because you want to be as specific as possible, partly because when you're writing because often for funds these days you have to write an evaluation report, and you will have to look at your outcomes from it. So it's that whole process about looking at your aims and objectives and then your outcomes, so then you can measure those quite easily, rather than if you've got a very big broad aim and then objective, then that's more difficult to measure and feedback to the funder about how you've achieved what you said you were going to do. So it's partly about that, and then it's partly about being clear to the funder about what you're actually doing as well, so, and how you're going to achieve that. So
yeah,
yeah,
can I just I mean, it's an aim that you are trying to enhance the visitor experience, aren't you? So that's a permissible aim to, I know it's a broad aim, but I mean,
yeah, and it may be that because visitor experience is quite, or visitor is quite broad, that it may be a specific part of that visitor audience that you're looking at, because again, you've got to, then it's going back to your need as well, that you're saying what your need is and then looking about what your aim and objective is from that. So if your need is that you're looking to expand your visitors and get more of a certain demographic in through that project, then that should be then reflected in your aim and your objective as well. So it's partly, well, it's not partly, it is about telling that story about what your top level is in terms of your need and what your project's about, and then following that through and making sure at every stage of your application that you're providing that evidence and supporting information for what you're doing and how you're doing it. So it is like looking at it as a story and about how you're going to support that story with your narrative and then your facts and your figures as well. So it's useful to think about it in terms of that whole as well as the individual elements as well. So does anybody else want to? Right. Okay, well, I'm just going to share the screen again, just share some examples of just aims and objectives, which are hopefully just sort of so just what I was talking about is being as specific as possible. So this is quite a specific aim in terms of increasing confidence and self-esteem, and that could be through and the objective is to provide a workshop for young people in curatorial skills, and it's part of something like museum takeover day, and that that will then hopefully link to that aim as well, because you're giving them increased skills and expertise, and part of that is helping to build confidence and self-esteem. And as I said, the aims and outcomes are linked, so aims describe what you plan to change and the outcomes describe the change that will happen as a result of what you do. So we are going to go and have a look at outcomes next, but I just want to check with everybody that everybody's okay with aims and objectives. Just put your fingers up, thumbs up with that. Or does anybody want to go over that in a bit more detail? Okay. 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 So again, this. Well, okay. Got it in the right order now. So an outcome is a result of what your project does. So it's a change that happens rather than an activity or service. So it's one of those things that is easiest just to talk about an example and about how it's different from an output. So the output of a teacher is to achieve, deliver a certain number of lessons, and then the outcome is wiser, happier students who are able to succeed. So I think when you're looking at a funding application, they will often ask for you to list your outcomes or your outputs, or sometimes both, depends on the funder. So it's just useful just to touch on that, just so you understand, and you can refer back to what outcomes are and what outputs are. So hopefully that little explanation, just that little example, will just help you just to understand what those differences are. Objectives and outputs are also linked, as we talked about, and then objectives describe, because objectives describe the activities you plan to run, and outputs are the actual activities you will run. So as you say, there's, as I was talking about before as well, there's that sort of story that you're moving through in terms of your funding application, and what funders are expecting for you to include in an application, and how you may be asked to express that. So in terms of funders, so it's just about just reiterating the importance of understanding your aims and objectives, outcomes and outputs. So they want to know the overall aim, which is quite likely to be part of the project summary. Again, some funders specifically ask for a project summary, some don't. If you're writing a letter in support of letter in response to guidance, then it's useful to include that as part of it. Again, you may get asked for that, you may not, but again, it's a useful starting point for your application, whether you're asked for it or not. As we said, understanding those outcomes is important, because funders will be interested in those outcomes, not just the activities you're delivering, but what you're actually getting out of it. So the actual solid kind of evidence that you're then going to feed back to them about what you've achieved through the project. Again, it's something that they're, funders are increasingly asking you to do, that is demonstrate the difference the project will make, and outcomes, and being clear about your outcomes helps with you demonstrating that you can do that in the first place, and then demonstrating that you can do it at the end of the project when you do your evaluation and feedback to them as well. And they will want outcomes to be measurable, and will ask you to set targets and how you will monitor and evaluate them. So again, I think one of the groups did raise this as a point about setting smart targets, and that is one thing definitely that funders are asking for more as well. So, and then just finally for this sort of section of the presentation, and again, this is something that at the beginning a few of the groups did actually feedback on, and then some of this actually came through in terms of the evidence as well. So it's that track record, which is obviously slightly different from your evidence as well. So your track record is demonstrating that you can deliver the project, and that you can actually do it and funders will want to see how you prove that. So it could be, for example, looking at your volunteers or staff skill and experience, and it doesn't necessarily mean skills and experience with putting in another funding application or delivering a project. It could be that, for example, that you've got a trustee with very good financial experience, and that's a specific skill that you can mention, and it doesn't matter whether you've done a project before or not. It's just that they've got those skills and they bring them from elsewhere. Could be project management skills. Again, if you're a volunteer, you might not have necessarily managed a project within a museum setting before, but it could be that you're a very experienced project manager within a different sector, which is often the case. So it's not just thinking about it within the museum context, but also from the wider context, and that could be particularly pertinent for volunteers. You may or may not have previous projects that you can use as your evidence for doing things before and being successful. Come across quite a few applications recently that are asking people to include a business plan. And I've had to work with an organisation to actually do one to meet funding application guidance, because it is something that seems to be increasingly being asked as a separate document to be included. But even if it's not, it's useful if you've got one and you can refer to it and to show how you're planning for the future and that you can be sustainable. And be an organisation that again, it goes back to this trust, and that they can trust you to deliver a project, and that you're going to be around to be able to deliver it as well. So it's part of that, showing that you're financially viable as well, which I think, again, some people mentioned as something. External standards you're meeting, accreditation is clearly one of those that you could be meeting, but there may be other things that you've, as an organisation, because there's specific nature of your organisation, that you meet them. So I work with an organisation that has to have very high standards in health and safety because of the type of organisation they are. So it may be that things that you have an extra requirement for the type of collection that you are, or the organisation you are. Again, things like legal status and your mission, and those bits of additional information about your organisation, about number of people who work for you. Some funders will explicitly ask for this information. They will ask to how many people you have working for you, how many trustees you have. And some places won't. It very much depends, but it's again going back and checking that what they're asking for and that you're supplying that. If they don't ask it, it's often useful to succinctly say that in the application, again, because it demonstrates that you as an organisation are able to deliver. So you're an entity that is capable of delivering. And that, yeah, you're a robust organisation. So right, so I thought just at the end it would be useful just to reflect on a few things about the presentation style and just writing, which a lot of this is common sense and just things that you should just common sense basically. But I think often when people are writing applications, they can often forget about it and write things, and they may be very clear and write things very clearly in other things, in other documents, but when they come to an application, they think the funder wants to hear things in a sort of much more complicated way. But actually, what they want is an application that's clear and easy to read. And that is, as I said, avoiding these long, densely worded paragraphs of text, because that's obviously difficult for any of us to read. And if you're a funder, you're reading through lots of applications, so they want to have something that they can easily see that it's a broken down bit of information that doesn't look too kind of on the page, look too kind of dense and off-putting. So I said this to someone recently. I was reviewing their application, and I said, you know, don't worry about using bullet points, headings, highlights, short paragraphs. I said anything that it just helps them to make it, and it helps make it easier to read. So and actually they came back and they'd put a lot of bullet points in and text headings and broken it down. It was much easier to read. You could really see the argument they were making and the story they were trying to tell. And it just made it a much easier application to read. They hadn't changed the content particularly. It just was much more clearly laid out. And I would say that that's one of the key things to do. Again, if you make something easier to read for people, then you know, you can have the best application in the world and it'd be difficult to read, and that may be the difference between you not getting the money and getting the money. So I know it sounds a very sort of like simple thing to say, but if you know, making it easier for somebody, then it can make the difference. And again, just talking about the actual style of writing as well. Again, like I said, just be clear and easy to understand in your language. Try not to use jargon and specialist terms. I mean, I know it's hard in museums sometimes because we do fall into that trap, and I do myself as well, and I do when I'm talking to people as well. But sometimes there may be, I mean, for someone like the National Computing Museum, for example, I mean, you may have something that is very jargony or specialist in terms of computings, but you know, just try and explain it in a simple way and clearly. Yeah, this is a really key one. Don't assume that whoever's reading your application knows you or your project, because you may not have had any interaction with them at all, and quite often that is the case. And what may be obvious to you is not maybe obvious to someone else as well. So again, it goes back to what we were saying right at the beginning about being clear about what your project is and those aims and objectives, and being writing things clearly and in an understandable way. As we said, use facts and figures to back up and support your claims. So if you're saying you know, that you want a certain number of people to come in to a workshop, say you want 10 people to come in, you could say that, you know, on average you get 10 people at your workshops. So it could be something as simple as that, just to say that, you know, you do have experience of people coming to workshops and that they're well attended, and that you're just, you know, you're dropping in that figure to support what you're saying. Again, a really common one is use active sentences or passive ones. Be positive. Don't say this project will aim to, instead this project will. And I think someone picked up right at the beginning is that it's that enthusiasm for your project. So make sure that comes through in your application. Don't let the application become too dry, because again, that's something that can creep in when you're trying to get over your points. And then this is something that is useful just to, again, I mean, it's just common sense, is just reflect some of that language back at the funders that they use. So if they've got a particular way of expressing something, or they say participation, for example, or engagement rather than when working with audiences, then use that sort of language back at them as well. And just to show that's, some people are worried about doing that, but it's useful to do that because it demonstrates to the funder that you've read their guidance and you've read their questions, and then you're reflecting that back at them. So don't be worried about using that language back at them. It's a good way of indicating to the funder that you've actually read what they're writing, and that you're not just wading in and doing an application, that you've actually, you know, understood what they're trying to get at too. So then just again, another really just simple tip is when you finish, get someone who's not involved with it to read it and give you feedback and suggest edits. So I know, again, a lot of this is very common sense and is just, you know, not sort of rocket science or anything, but it's just bearing it in mind, because these are some of the things that when people are writing funding applications, they can they just don't make it through into the application itself. So it's just making sure that you're just reflecting on the style of your writing and how you're presenting things. So I'll take you off mute in a minute, or not mute, off the share in a minute, and we can just look back and see if there's any other questions you have. So As we said, we've got free grant writing surgeries at the moment, so if anybody wants to come, you just go through your local MDO and to book a slot. So I have hour-long slots, and I can provide advice on any aspect of funding applications that you want to. So for example, I've done everything from looking at people's figures to check those, to reading over it, being the outside person to read over an application, to then at the other side of things, just looking at an organisation that was starting out and just wanted some quite general a general chat about funding and funding applications. And actually I sent them the first workshop that I did, their slides, and they were just like, oh yeah, that's great, that's what we need. So I spent a bit of time talking about that. And then one of the key things we talked about that was lease requirements, actually, because that was something that they particularly wanted to focus on. And then the next grant writing workshop is on the 22nd of September, and excitingly we'll be looking at figures. So I'm just going to take everybody off, just stop sharing. Okay. Ah, no, Heather, no. Do you want to come back off mute, and everybody, and then if people's cameras are working, do come off, do come into that. Danielle, don't worry if you're you've still got a dodgy.
Here go.
Yeah, you might have to go again, so don't worry about that. Yeah. No, Heather, there's not. At the moment, I've got till the end of the financial year, so just let me know. And as I say, just go through. I think Helen would be your local person to go through and just book in. And as I say, I've had quite a wide range of people come through to me, from sort of larger organisations going for the cultural recovery grants to smaller organisations looking at smaller grants with lots of money. So and then people obviously come through for different reasons as well. So does anybody else have any other questions or want to clarify anything that we've gone over today? I realise there's quite a lot of information that I pumped at you, so quite a lot to take in. So just all looking very like I've got us. If there is anything afterwards that you think about, do drop me a line. Or if there's anything that I mentioned, like Andrew, I mentioned some of the stats, didn't I, and outside things, but if there's anything that you want me to point you in the direction of, let me know.
Okay. I found it very, very helpful. We don't currently have a grant in progress, but I suspect over the winter we will, and we may well take advantage of one of your surgeries, or even ask for a bit more support.
Yeah, as I say, it's just hopefully, because there's a range of people experience in the group, so hopefully I wasn't telling too many people how to suck eggs with it, so it's always a danger of that. So I have to say, I mean, a lot of writing grant applications, I'll send this to Helen just while you're in the breakout rooms, a lot of it is quite, it's a lot of common sense. It's just making, as I say, making sure you read the guidance and then write the application to that guidance, and then ensuring that you've got that support to back up what you're writing as well. So it's, the funders tend to tell you everything that they want you to tell them. So as long as you're responding to that and responding to the questions. So one of the things that comes up quite a lot is within applications, some questions can sound quite similar to each other, but actually funders, they're looking for something slightly different within each of those questions. So it's just making sure that you read the question, and then they'll often have supplementary guidance to those questions as well. Just making sure that you know, it may sound to you like you're repeating the information, but don't be worried about that, because they'll be getting something slightly different out of it, and we're wanting to know how you're responding to it. So I do always say to people, don't, if you feel like you're repeating yourself or being too simple about it, don't worry about that, because actually the funder's not, they're probably going to be somebody that doesn't know you and doesn't know your organisation very well. So what may be obvious and clear to you is tell them, because they're not going to know. So, yes, Angie. Yeah.
How do funders judge our applications? Do they have a matrix where you've got to sort of tick the boxes, or is it like, you know, when you judge for job applications, or is it more nebulous than that?
Some do and some don't. So, and some will tell you what they do and how what their criteria is for assessment, and then some won't. So a good thing to do is have a look at their previous grants that they've awarded. So a lot of funders will have that information up, and that will tell you quite a lot about what and how that funder operates, because you can see that from their applications that they've approved of funds that they're giving out. So that's always a really useful thing to do. I was talking to someone recently, and there's a question in there which we weren't quite sure about how they should answer. So it was museum locally to me, and we were just having a chat about it through one of the surgeries, and I said, well, go back and have a look and about what they've given out in the past and what types of projects, and that will help you answer that question. So that's often a really useful thing to do, is just go and look about what other projects have gone through as well. Some will have more information and others. The lottery has quite detailed information up there. Others will have less, so it might just be lists and things. And then, as I say, and some will have their criteria up there and how they assess, because they're interested in transparency. I was doing one recently, it's MEND grants, was the Museum Estate grants, and in their guidance they literally at the end they have a criteria thing and say, we will be assessing you against this criteria. And yeah, so that's right at the end of the document, but I read that first because actually that was the bit that is the most important element of it, because if that's what they're going to be assessing you on, then that's what you need to include in the application. So yeah, so that was really helpful, but not everybody does that, so it just
right. Thank you.
Helen, got your hand up.
Do you tend to get much feedback from funders if you aren't successful?
Depends. It's always the answer. Some do and some don't. It really depends. Sometimes it depends on the volume of applications they've had in. So it's not necessarily that they will have done it in the past and won't do it for this, because it'd be a volume thing. And then some that you will get quite detailed feedback. So for example, if you go to the Heritage Fund, that tends to be quite detailed feedback. But then other funders I've had, it's like a no, and you try and get any information out of them and they're just like, no, we've had too many applications, you'll just get a general, you weren't successful this time. And what they might do is say, they might give you an indication about, you can apply again, or they might give you a sort of hard no and say, don't bother coming back to us again. So you would sometimes you get that flag with them, but it can be dependent on volume generally. So, but some won't. Some never do. I mean, there are funders out there that don't give feedback no matter what. So yeah, useful when they do though. So, and with the lottery sometimes as well, with them you will get. So I've had follow-up meetings with people as well. So yeah, they tend to have quite they try and develop quite a close relationship with you as well. So which is always a useful thing to try and do if you can, is develop a kind of relationship with a funder, because they often do like that and do want you to move through their application process and be successful. So, Helen.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on a couple of points, really, just to let people know that MDOs at your local MDO can really help you with this process. I don't think we advertise enough that we read through, we can be that external reader for your grant applications. it doesn't matter if you come to us for funding as well, because I think sometimes I forget that museums see us as a funder, because we're advice and we obviously offer funding, but I don't think we see ourselves solely just as a funder. So, whenever we look at your work, for other applications, that's not going to make us look badly upon you for say, for applying to us, for example. So MDOs do that. They do have time to do that. They do also have time to help you be accountable in your projects, depending on obviously how big the project is. But if it was something like a project steering group or something like that, it's worth asking if the MDO's got capacity to help sit on that and to have that external sort of, I think we carry a little bit of weight in terms of the smaller grants. So that might help you. And also to think about our grants as that sort of playground, as that sort of testing ground for improving your grant writing skills before you go for bigger amounts. So that's really what we're trying to do, especially for be that sort of baby step between us and the Arts Council funds, for example, as well. So, and also I think there was something around trying to help museums meet those sort of statements around equality, diversity and inclusion, and also environmental, because those two questions are coming up a lot in grant applications now. How are you meeting your environmental needs in this project? How are you meeting your EDI needs? So, and they're quite big things to think about. And so we're trying to look at that, just to let you know, we're trying to look at that, how we can help museums do that more within our own grants, and maybe give some examples of some sort of statements or thoughts or thinking that you could put down in grant applications around those areas. So yeah, those are my only outstanding points, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really, sorry, Andrew, I'll come to you in a minute. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, as you say, those points are coming up more and more in funding applications, and they are big topics for museums to get their heads around. I was actually talking to a colleague about the issue around environmental impact and about museums just demonstrating that the other day, because it is, again, I think museums tend to think quite narrowly about how they can do that, but actually there's a whole range of things that you can do. So yes, I think support around that would be really needed, actually, because it's something that I know when I read HF applications, people are already struggling with that.
I think we're going to maybe see if we can sort of put some question prompts in our guidance, just to prompt you into thinking, for instance, do you do this or do you do that?
Examples of what people do as well, because I think always sort of fall into that trap slightly of oh, we're going to recycle our paper and things like that, but actually it can be really much broader than that, because you can look at rewilding and all sorts of things. I'm working with the museum at the moment where they're going to look at bringing in goats to get back the vegetation. So they were really excited when they found out they could have goats that could control your greenery. And I was like, oh yeah, other places do that. That's a really good one. But it was something they hadn't thought about at all. And, to put that into an HF application is going to be really good. So I think we're going to look into hiring a goat, which is, has all sorts of things. Anyway, so I was like, yeah, they were very excited about it. And I had actually worked with someone else who had done that before, and actually they've done an incredible job. I mean, they've got 3 goats, and the vegetation they go through, incredible. So Angie, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, reiterate the approaching your MDO, because I've done that for an application, and she was brilliant, so really approachable. She read through the application sort of 3 times in the end. Her advice was spot on. It's just brilliant, and it just, we were successful with the bid in the end. But yeah, I think the MDOs are a brilliant source of information, support, and from those conversations that I had with her, it sprung other ideas for the future as well. But yeah, just to reiterate, the MDOs is a really good source of information, and I've benefited from it.
Yeah, I think as Helen said, sometimes people don't realise that they can go to their MDOs for that kind of support and help as well. So, and then it just happens that I'm on top of it as well. It got me in additional extra. Was there anything in specifically that people from today that they particularly wanted me to send round in terms of additional information? I know there's some stuff around that external sources of.
I was going to say, Sonia, that maybe some signposting to those like reports that you mentioned. And I mean, like you say, I do think we have to keep in mind like the size of grant that you're going for in terms of that, you know, because, you know, do we want to be quoting like Mendoza, you know, plans or whatever if you're going for a small grant? No. But I think just some general signposting to the bigger things and smaller things would be really useful.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to do that because I use those type of things all the time. So it's just things I pulled out some examples. And you know, as I say, those things are useful if you're doing other bits of work. So it's not just for writing funding applications, but it's if you're looking at developing audiences and things as well. So it's those sources are helpful across your museum. It's not just for funding, but it's just I think was as evidence today is people thinking a bit more broadly about where they can get that information from and using things that may not be you know, that immediately that springs to mind about, because I've used National Health Service stats for things when I put in a project that was very much based around health and well-being. So we very much looked at our local health authority and what they were reporting locally, but then also what the National Health Support reports globally, and then there was some you know, specific reports. That was quite a large scale application. So we were looking at doing those kind of local, regional, national, and then supporting, you know, with things like letters of support from local organisations that wanted to work with them, from people like Mind and things like that as well. So I mean, as I say, that was quite a large scale HF application, but it does show that there are sources of information out there that you can draw upon and use. So, but even if you're looking at
working in partnership as well, isn't it? Even if, you know, even if it's just part of that sort of information gathering, research gathering, you know, evidence or other skills that you don't have in house, you know, that's all, like, it might be relevant at that stage in order to make your project like more professional. But there might not be a partner in the grant, essentially, like in the delivery necessarily, but it could be.
And I think, I mean, we didn't really touch on this because it's kind of it's another kind of a topic in itself, actually, is working in partnership, because increasingly funders are looking at you working in partnership and you drawing on people's expertise and not relying completely on your own. So for example, the new Heritage Fund guidance is very much more outward looking and they're much more interested in how you're working with people locally and using their skills and experience as well. So it's not all about what you have internally, it's about what you're drawing into the project externally and what those external partners can bring to you. I mean, there's always been part of the HF's guidance, but it's the COVID and that they've re-looked at their grant guidance. It's much stronger emphasis than it was before. So I mean, that is the point I would also say as well, just a quick one at the end, is just that I got caught out with this recently as I started writing a HF application and then realised they'd changed their funding guidance, and I hadn't realised that they were doing it, because the guidance that, it's a slightly kind of complicated thing, but it's always worth checking, no matter what stage you are in the funding, writing it, that you've not been caught out. Because I'd got sort of halfway through writing a funding application, happened to see something and realised I was writing to an old application form. So even if you're in the middle of an application, it's worth just checking back at times as well, because they can change it. Yeah, so it's just as a bit of a health warning, that one, because I got caught out with that. But
and also from the sessions that we've done with sort of meet the funder sessions, it's very apparent that, you know, you can come to the same funder for multiple projects as long as they are separate projects or separate funds. It's absolutely fine. Yeah. You know, don't worry or don't wait for all the stars and moons to align. You know, it's just put your best foot forward and
get in there, basically.
And go for it. Yeah, get in there.
Yeah, because I was just saying to Helen, one of the things that I looked at in the first workshop was looking at doing a funding matrix, which sounds much more grand than it actually is, but it's looking at what projects you've got and then looking what funders are out there, and then creating basically a grid about what is out there and when you can apply and match it to things. So then also then if you've got projects there that no funder matches, but it's a project, then if something does come up that you've got it there and you've got it as a sort of oven ready project as such. So it's you're leading what you're doing and how you're using funders and what you're using them for as well. So it's putting you on the front foot and being in a good position to respond to things that come out. So for example, this MEND one that came out, I mean, I was lucky. I was working with an organisation where we'd done that and we'd identified what we were doing, and we knew we had a project and we knew we had everything that we could tick, or most of the things that we could tick to put in an application to them, and we got through the expression of interest thing. But I think partly it was because we'd done that bit of work as well, or partly it was because we'd done that bit of work. So again, once that is live, that's just a useful tool to use in terms of mapping what you're doing and how you want to work and what you want to do in the future. Cool.
Thanks very much, Sonia. That's
Sorry.
It's been very useful. I mean, I did go a little bit cross-eyed when you started mentioning aims, objectives, and I started breaking out in a cold sweat and remembering all my business planning days. I'm like, oh, what is it again? It's the aim that I think it's it doesn't matter how many times you go over it.
People have got them to refer to. They're there, and you can go back, you can have a look at them and see what a objective outcome output is. But it's just one of those things. Again, it's just like, because it ties people in knots. I mean, I was working with someone who we were trying to work out outcomes and outputs, and
I think it's kind of, you have to remember it as like a call and a response. I think the two pairings go together. Like the aims. The aims equal, they should match up with the outcomes, and the objectives match up with the outputs. But like don't spend too much time on that stuff.
Thing that people could go refer back to, because I just think there's quite a lot to take. As I said before, I mean, I think it's a lot to take in terms of things, but I think if you go back to it sort of very basically, read the guidance and respond to the guidance and respond to the questions, then you're off to a good start. And then write things clearly and succinctly, and as I say, use paragraphs and bullet points. I mean, you're a long way there to getting an application.
I think you've got to be, like you say, passionate about your project, but you can't assume that the person who's reading it is going to be interested in your organisation or interested in your project. So you have to be sort of quite concise about it, really. You don't want to sort of go down that rabbit hole of just writing paragraph after paragraph about the history of your organisation.
How wonderful you are too much. So it's that balance, between the two of them.